Keep your head up. You're not alone. Keep your head up. Keep your head up. We're halfway home.
It's time for Your Voices of Hope, a video podcast program that offers straight talk on some of the major issues facing us today: addiction, domestic violence, homelessness, human trafficking, and suicide. But more than that, it's our desire to inspire hope. Now, your host, Michelle Beyer.
My guest today has been abused as far back as she could remember by her stepfather, by her father, her brother, boyfriends, family members, as far back as she could remember. Bounced around from family member to family member, 11 different schools. This is my guest's very first time speaking about her trauma and what had gone on in her life, what she's gone through, what she's going through now. My guest today is just going to go by Amy, and she has graciously accepted to be on camera. And I actually commend you, Amy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
For being on video. This is a really big step for you, isn't it?
It is. It's been really hard to talk about my story. It's something where I notice I have a lot of like PTSD and anxiety around it. And so when I try to speak my story, it does bring up a lot of negative emotions and feelings that I have to push through in order to tell it.
Right. Because, sometimes when we talk about our past, it does trigger some feelings that could take us backwards at times.
Right. And I think for me, my story is a lot of it. I asked for help and I kept asking for help and I kept telling my story, and it was used against me to victim blame me. And so that kind of set me up to feel like my story is not a story that people want to hear. And it's hard.
What does that mean? What do you mean by victim blaming?
Victim blaming? Well, I guess in what I've come to understand in our society is that, our society doesn't like victims. It seems like it's more offensive to be abused than it is to be the abuser. So I feel like a lot of times the way that my family and community responded was to make me responsible for things that were beyond my control. I was ostracized in community and I was bullied, and just received a lot of hatred and violence and cruelty that wasn't mine. It's systematic oppression that we deal with, just like homophobia or racism.
Right.
It's like victim phobia, like don't get your domestic violence cooties on me. If I can just ignore you and pretend that it's not happening, then I won't be impacted.
Well, go back to your earliest memory that you have of being abused. How far back can you actually remember?
I remember it's hard because I remember being with my parents when I was young before I have like solid memories, and trying to piece together, what's happened. And it's been difficult. For me, I started having repressed memories come up about 5 years ago, and things that I had no idea, and they would just come up, and so I had to learn how to process those correctly, how to have the right tools to understand what I went through, and the impact that it had. And so in processing this, I've done a lot of looking back and internalizing and reflecting, but there was certain pieces that I just didn't know where they fit in, and certain kind of clues. And that's how I've kind of figured out that there are things that happened, like injuries on my body that I can't explain, and just certain things that happened before I was able to remember anything.
And you had mentioned your dad is a schizophrenic psychopath. Is that what you said?
He's schizophrenic sociopath.
Sociopath, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
So tell us, what is that like to grow up? Because, I understand the schizophrenic, I work with that, but I don't know if I've ever seen that, a psychopath,
Sociopath.
sociopath. I keep saying the other
Mhm.
word because I have it written down backwards on my pad here. So that's the dyslexia in me. So tell us a little bit about that, and how is that to live with someone? Was he unmedicated?
He was definitely unmedicated. I didn't really go live with him until I was 7. And during the time from when I was a small baby until that time when I was 7, I lived with my grandparents and had a very normal life. And I know what that stability looks like. So when I went to go live with him when I was 7, it was very abrupt, very apparent right away what that's like. And, schizophrenia is people that they have paranoia, they don't understand reality, they can
Right.
lose track of time. So for me, that would be, dinner would not be served, bills would not get paid, we would go without, having things that we needed like hot water. um, just basic resources were not taken care of.
Right.
um, and he was diagnosed by the military. um, and it really wasn't until later when I did therapy at our local domestic violence organization, and talking with them, learning about narcissistic personality disorder and that whole spectrum of the type of personalities, those cluster B people that are abusers, and understanding that to realize that he had behavioral patterns that are more than just schizophrenia. Um, Sociopaths are just on that spectrum of narcissism. So it's when you lack empathy, when it's people that lack empathy, people that seek to harm. So he would play emotional and mental manipulations for me to have my basic resources, and then I had to negotiate with him. So
Negotiate what? What did you have to negotiate?
well, he would play games like when I was young. I'm trying to think, any resource, anything could be a game. In fact, any opportunity for control is a game.
Right.
So he would keep all of the cups in the kitchen on like the super high shelf on the top third row. And then he would say, well, you have to come ask me for a glass because I don't want you climbing on the counter. No, I will not do anything reasonable. I leave a cup on the counter for you to, have. And, so it was like this game where, I had to ask him, but then he was always busy and he was always involved in something, and so there was no solution. It was just a game, and if I got caught climbing on the counters to get a cup, I've been ripped down off the counter. If I try to go and ask him for a cup, then I'm disturbing him, and then that could get hit for that.
I was just going to
So
ask, is there physical abuse involved?
absolutely, I was deeply physically abused.
In what
um,
way?
It's just being, he had a rage disorder. So a lot of times he would just fly off the handle. I would be hit upside the head a lot. I still today have head trauma that I have to manage. I see a neurologist. I have a medical team to manage the head trauma that was never properly taken care of. I've had my tooth knocked out. I've had to get stitches in my hand. Um, he's thrown me downstairs, and somehow by the grace of God I landed on my feet because there was a huge bag of glass that was right in front of me, and like I land and I go down and I touch the bag and grab my grab myself, but then I cut my hand. And it just always reminds me, like, if I hadn't like stopped myself and landed just right, I would have landed in that bag of glass, and it was just like always having to watch out for, myself and for his behavior, for his outburst.
And you lived with your dad until you were 14. Where did you go after you were 14, and why did you leave your dad?
Um, there was a lot of reports of abuse that were happening, and I was negotiating a court system that was failing me. So at that time, it was our last quarrel. I had been taken out of the home several times, and I had to be put into foster care, maybe for a weekend or a week, and then after a while it'd be for a month. And then I went to a group home where I was a group home for delinquents, and I was like being punished for being abused. And so I had to go through this system. um, and there's another like awakening that's happening where a lot of people are starting to realize that a lot of these group homes and wilderness therapy was producing this tough love where people were unqualified that shouldn't have been in there. They were doing things that were really harmful. So it was just another level of abuse because I was put into this level system, and there was no way to ever not be on a low level. And they got into a lot of trouble too in the group homes because they never treated us well. They never did what we were supposed to. They were, taking money that was supposed to be for us and pocketing it. So,
Right.
And there is a campaign, and I'm trying to think of the name of it off the top of my head. I'll have to come back around because they're bringing awareness, and there's a lot of people who have been abused. And it wasn't until I came across this campaign did I really begin to understand that that group home and that system abused me as well, because I shouldn't have been in a situation where I'm trying to rehabilitate my behavior if I haven't done anything. I'm just trying. I was running away, but I was running away from somebody that was, trying to kill me,
Right.
and children. And there were our kids and people that would hide me in their homes and under their beds and in their closets. So I'd have a safe place for the night when I was running from him. Yeah. And yeah, one time when I ran away, this girl exchanged coats with me so that I could run away, and he did come after her. And then she was like, "Hey, I'm not who you think I am." And so she gave me time to go and get away from him.
Wow.
Yeah.
So from there, you went to your grandparents on your dad's side?
I went to my I went to my grandmother and my brother on my mom's side,
Your mom's side.
maternal.
Where you experienced more abuse from your brother.
Right. And so I went to go live with my grandmother, and she was amazing. And my brother, who was older, he was an adult, but he was there. And so what happened during this time, her son, my mom's brother, would not take me in, and he has 3 girls my age. But they were going to take me in, and then they decided at the last minute to not take me in. And so my grandmother had to move out of his home and get an apartment so I can come live with her because they wouldn't accept me. And they're like founding members of an evangelical church in Georgia, and they blame me for the abuse. My cousin told me that I didn't listen to my father. I disobeyed my father, and that's why I'm in trouble.
Well, tell us about what type of abuse you suffered physically from your brother and your dad. I mean, how bad was this abuse? Did they break your bones? And I mean, what did these monsters do?
Well, let's see. The last time I got into a physical altercation with my father, it was when I was 14. And I had just been returned back from a group home and returned to my father. And I knew, schizophrenics, they have cycles, and you can kind of predict their behavioral patterns, especially when you're dealing with, trauma, and you have hypervigilance. And so you tune into what's going on around you. And I could just tell, something was coming, and it was really scaring me. So I went out to the road and I pulled up these road reflectors off the side of the road, and like these big, tall, long, 6-foot long steel poles. And I took 3 of them and I put them in my room behind my door. And, it was hard because at the time I knew that the act of taking those things was an act of defiance. It's illegal. I can't take road signs off the side of the road. And if I had been stopped, then I would have been in trouble. But I was doing it to save my life because nobody else would do it. And so I put those in my room, and my dad was like, "What are these?" And I was like, "Oh, those are just my puppets. I'm going to do some art project with them. Those are great." And he was like, "Okay, whatever." And then later on that day, I was on the phone with a friend, and he started to go into a rage for whatever reason. And so I was able to say, "Corey, call the cops." And then my dad hung up the phone and started to choke me, and we started to fight. And I don't remember exactly, but what was happening. I do remember some glass got broke, and I was struggling to get the fight on the other side of my door. And I was successful, and I got him on the other side of my door, and I ran around and I barricaded the door, and I barricaded myself in. And then I grabbed a piece of glass and I held it in my hand, and I jumped in my closet and waited for something to happen. And the next thing I knew, the cops were there and saying, "Can you unbarricade this door?" And, found me there with just beaten and bloody and bruised, and they took me to the hospital. And that was it. And I had to get stitches on my hand. But my father was never held accountable for that.
Why not?
Because we live in a system that doesn't support survivors. I know that my story is very much like a lot of people, where the system fails survivors.
So you grow up, you're 18, you get away from this, so you think, and you start to date. Do you find the man of your dreams that pulls you away from all of this?
No,
Not knight in shining armor?
no. I find a lot of broken men. I feel that as a survivor and as an empath and somebody who's sensitive, I feel that I carry that vulnerability with me, and I carry those scars. And as much as I try to hide them from people, they get seen. And so I feel like I attract more abusive men. I attract those narcissistic people and those sociopaths. I attract similar behaviors. And then, it took a long time to really overcome and understand that level of abuse that it took. So definitely, did not have good partners. My son's father is a covert alcoholic narcissist. But at the time that I was with him, it was nothing compared to what I had been through. So I was just happy I wasn't getting hit, and, somebody that had a sense of reality, so it took a long time to wake up and to see. And it wasn't really until I got the correct therapy and the right help with people that understand domestic violence, childhood abuse, CPTSD, and, narcissistic abuse.
What is the initials that you just said? CBS?
Or CPTSD?
Yes. Explain what that is.
A complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That is, well, there's like 2 types of trauma that people experience. And PTSD is like when you experience something like a car accident or, a surgery or something that happened very quick. But when you have complex PTSD, it means that you've experienced abuse over a prolonged period of time. It's complex, and so it impacts you on a different level than I think than like regular CPTSD or PTSD.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier to me about polytrauma. I've never heard that term before. Explain what polytrauma is.
That was a term that was given to me when I had gone to therapy at a domestic violence organization, and they said that you have been through polytrauma, meaning multiple abusers. My story is classic, where when you go through abuse at home or as a child, then that will set you up to have multiple abusers in your life. So they call it polytrauma.
Okay. And so was your son, and did the father of your son, did he abuse you and your son? Was your son ever abused by any of the men that you dated? His father?
I've
This
worked
pattern?
really hard to keep my son away from all of that. My son has turned out to be a great ally for me. The first time that, when my son was about 7, my dad came unannounced, uninvited to our home, and he was having a schizophrenic episode. And I was tolerating it and just tolerating it and dealing with it because I thought that it was my responsibility to manage him. But then he started to get aggressive with my son, and he started to poke him in his chest and tell him he didn't like the way that he was responding to him. And he really scared my child. And that's the moment that kind of woke me up, where I'm like, I guess I deserve this treatment, but I know that my son does not deserve that treatment. And that's when I told him off and told him to go to hell. And that was the last time I've ever seen my father. And then my brother did something similar at Christmas, where he was drinking and just being an asshole and scared my child. And it was seeing that, him being mean to my child, that I also went no contact with my brother. So you don't mess with my kid.
Right.
Yeah. And he's been really helpful to me, and he's been an ally. I think that, I mean, he's impacted by having a father who drinks. That is not fun, but I don't think it's anywhere near the exposure to what I've been through.
Thank
And
God.
yeah, yeah. And I don't think he even realizes it. He has his normal teenage complaints, and
Good. Yeah. Um, I'm happy to hear that he doesn't realize it and doesn't know. That's the last thing we want him to have to go and know what his mom's been through. Because that could be very traumatic to a child.
yeah, I
To
think so. And
know.
he has an idea. He's kind of figured things out. Well, there was a moment when my father came on the last visit and he poked my son in the chest. I called my son's father to come over, because I just wanted some support, because I had just told my father to go away. He was not welcomed, and we had gone home, and I was afraid he was going to come and be there. So I called my son's father, and he comes over and he's there for a while, and he says, "Are we done with your drama now? Can I go?" And my 7-year-old son comes and sits down next to me and puts his arm around me and says, "Mama, I understand what it was like to live with Grandpa, and we never have to see him again."
Nice.
And that's the difference between an ally and a victim blamer.
Right.
And
And
it is
so, go
it's
ahead. I'm
hard to put that on my child. It's hard, because he has to be an ally, but he does see a mom that works hard for him, and he has tools and community and support. So
So what are you doing now? What physical and mental residuals are you having, and how are you overcoming them?
I guess for me, the hardest part about going through domestic violence um, is the response of community. Abuse thrives not because of the abuser, but how community responds. And so today, I think the biggest challenges I face is to really still, process and understand my story, but also to have really strong boundaries and to understand, the discrimination that I still face, and being really discerning about who is my community. Still trying to go through that process of editing people, like who do I fit with, who does not fit anymore. Um, you know, Victim blaming is something that is a systematic oppressional response to domestic violence. And I think that has been the most harmful to me because that can take away opportunities. It's ostracizing. It's devastating. We need community. We need to be connected. We need to have that to thrive. And so I think that getting ostracized and disconnected, um, and people don't really have a lot of respect for survivors. um we like to think we do, but it's just like, oh, well, I'm not homophobia. No one's going to admit, yeah, I'm a homophobic or I'm a racist. Like nobody admits those things, and nobody's going to say, oh, I don't hate victims. But it's like those little things deep inside that we don't realize we're doing, those little microaggressions, those little beliefs that we don't think about, that I think are the most harmful. So right now I'm trying to reassess and refigure out and reconfigure, and it's taken a while. I feel pretty good. I like the friends that I have now, and that community of people who understand that, and that is people who are social justice warriors, progressives, other survivors, people who have faced similar discrimination, queer community, have all been my allies. And so I'm building that back up, and trying to redefine community as a survivor and what that looks like.
Right. Now, I don't know if all areas, you live in North Carolina, you said.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if all areas are the same as that area, treating their victims and all that stuff. And, I think communities are all different. And
Well, being in the South, I will say that, we deal with white supremacy, and that's a huge issue. And that ties into it because it is very misogynistic, Christian conservatives, that's all in there. And, I see it as a threat to my safety and well-being every day.
Are you afraid of anything right now? Do you live in fear? Do you feel safe right now?
I do feel safe in my home. I do not feel safe in community. I do not feel that my community respects me, hears me, um, acknowledges me, and sees my story and sees my hard work.
Well, what about going to the grocery store? Do you feel safe? I mean, you're just a normal anonymous person.
Well, in my community, it's kind of a small city. So I used to go to the grocery store and I would always run into somebody I know, to the point where my son would say, Mom, we're going to the grocery store. Do not talk to anybody. You cannot get into conversations. We're just going in and out. And so this was a community that was very open. But I find myself going to other supermarkets further from my house on days when I'm not feeling well, and I just don't want to run into anybody. I don't want to, talk to anybody. I have been recovering from some health issues as well. I've had some complicated migraines and head trauma.
Is this from the abuse?
I think so. I mean, it's hard to say. There's no concrete evidence, but I was hit upside the head several times as a
Right.
child and never had any type of help. I started getting migraines when I was 18,
Hmm.
and never had like an MRI, never had anything. So we can only guess, and that's all tied in, migraines, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of, data that shows people who've been through trauma, who have CPTSD, it does tie into, a lot of health issues.
Right. It does. I know with football players, they say that you get hit in the head once, and it does cause damage for the rest of your life. So I'm sure that there's been a lot of damage done being hit in your head as much as you've been hit. So I can't even imagine. And you had mentioned that you're going to school and that you've had a business, and how do you and your son survive? Do you have a job and earn money, and you're surviving? Tell us how you're surviving and getting through.
Well, I think that I've had an opportunity to go to college and be educated, and I have a lot of skills. Um, I do have a business that I built as a face and body artist, in the community, something that I love doing and make good money. With the pandemic, it's slowed down because there's no festivals and there's no events. Um, and I love it. I do really great with it. And the only problems I really face is just having to kind of manage where my family is, like what's going on with them, where are they at, just kind of having to look over my shoulder and just keep moving forward. Um, During this pandemic, it's been a great chance to slow down for me, and I've actually been through a lot of healing this past year. Just getting to do different types of healing stuff, a lot of counseling and therapy and acupuncture and massage and physical therapy, even to help, try to manage these migraines. So it's been a lot of time and reflection. And I decided to go back to school, because I had a transfer degree that I never got to finish. And so I hope that when I'm there, my goal is to kind of figure out a way to use my art, to tell my story. I feel that through my face and body art, um, I provide a service. I do magic when I paint, and it's because I can
Mhm.
read people, and I've used my skills of hypervigilance to read people and then reflect what they want. And I try to give them things that are positive, that make them feel good, and acknowledge them. And so that process, has been healing. And I realize a lot of it is, working with archetypes and working with, putting on a mask and seeing yourself as like a ferocious tiger, because that's might be what you need to feel that day. You need to
Mhm.
feel
Right.
like a tiger, but the
Right.
next day maybe you need to be a cute little bunny,
Right.
and feel that for a day. And
Right.
so I love doing that. And so I've learned how to use this art, as a way to, show people what they need to see that day, and according myself too. But it's also very joyful and playful. And I hope that I would, through this process of going to school, I can find a way to use my art to honor the shadow self, the darker side, to tell my story. Um, you know,
Now, I'm sorry. There's a one question that I went and forgot to ask you early on. With your dad's mental health diagnosis, does that worry you about you or your son? Have you been diagnosed with any type of mental illness as your son? Because
it
it
is
is hereditary.
it is hereditary. And actually, looking back at, ancestry.com, I could kind of trace it back, and I can see that it comes from his mother's side of the family. Um, and I could see, how that goes. For my father, and his story, he was abused by his mom, and he was not supported, having these things. And he went into the military when he was 18. And that's actually where he was diagnosed, and then he was discharged. So what they're saying is that schizophrenics, are really, vulnerable between the ages of 18 to 24. Yeah, so schizophrenics are really vulnerable between the ages of 18 and 24. That's kind of when things come out, and you want to protect them from stressful situations. So sending them to Vietnam at 18 is not good. So that's kind of like what happened, what brought it out more. It seems like because his mom abused him, that also brought it out more. What was interesting though is that when I lived with her, she never abused me at all. So I think that, part of that is nurture and nature. Abuse causes and brings out mental illness. It makes it worse. And as far as me, I'm in the clear. The only thing that I've been diagnosed with is anxiety, depression, PTSD. And I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, but I don't think I was. I think that was a misdiagnosis of PTSD, not seeing the abuse. And it was during the 90s when every child was diagnosed with ADHD. But that would put me on the spectrum of neurodivergent. So I could say I'm a little neurodivergent. Maybe I don't, see things the way other people do. Maybe I do have a little bit of ADHD. But I don't have anything. And then on the other side, my mom's side of the family, I think that her father was a big narcissist. My brother is clearly a narcissist, and my uncle is narcissist. So on my mom's side, I see a lot of, white supremacy and narcissistic sociopathic tendencies.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for doing this with us today. And I know what it takes to talk about this. And again, you weren't sure about doing video, and I am fine with you not. If people don't want to be on video, that's great. I don't even want to be on video,
Right.
So, but I have to. So I thank you so much for doing this interview.
Thank you for letting me come on and take this opportunity to try to tell my story. I'm just now starting to find the strength and need to say it. So it's been a hard journey to get to this point.
And, it will help people. And there is, phone numbers to call, and I will have them all posted on my website with this. There's a 1-800 line for domestic violence, and then there's your local domestic violence shelters. And if you're not feeling safe, please, use these numbers. They're there to help you. I know that I've used them in the past, and they're there. They do help. They really do. So again, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank everyone else for listening to another episode of Your Voices of Hope, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
You've been listening to Your Voices of Hope with your host, Michelle Beyer. This podcast and earlier programs are available for viewing on our Facebook page, Your Voices of Hope, or our website, yourvoicesofhope.com.
Keep your head